Hey everyone, this is the Blockchain for Europe webinar on data on the blockchain. Thank you for joining today. I'm having the pleasure to have a very distinguished panel here with us today, discussing this very important issue. And starting in the order of institutional affiliation, I will introduce you to Anna Ludin. She's the policy officer for data policy working in the European Commission. Jacek Pikul, who's the CTO for privacy at a company called Billon. Ingo Rübe, he's the CEO and founder of Bot Labs and Killed. And then last but not least, Geoffrey Goodell, sorry for this. He's the research associate, expert on blockchain-related issues in the University College of London. Thank you guys for being here today. And the idea of today's webinar is to basically present you an overview of what the Commission is doing, what the industry is doing, and where we think there's great collaboration and where's room to improve and why this is the case. And for that reason, I would like to hand over to Anna, who will present us the view of the European Commission today, which, as you all know, is the initiator of all good at the European level, and therefore proposes a lot of regulations, and some of them she will present to you today. So, Anna, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and also for the kind introduction. Let me briefly start with a small disclaimer. I work on data policy in the European Commission, and I'm not an expert on either eIDAS or financial regulation, and we don't focus on the GDPR. So you might think, so what is she actually doing? What is data policy? So data policy looks at how to shape the data-driven society, the economy. And if you want to have a closer look at what the Commission does, probably the European strategy for data is the most relevant document that summarizes all the activity and the vision to create a general internal market for data. That is from February 2020. And in this strategy, of course, several legislative initiatives have been announced and some are ongoing. And I can give you some info about what is going on, but I would also like to take this opportunity to explain a bit the link between actually the activity in the field of data policy with blockchain actually, because in my previous position working in the German economic ministry, we were also focusing on AI and blockchain policy next to the data economy. And with this background, I'm really trying to bridge what is actually the problems we look at in the field of blockchain and how does it relate to what we do in the data policy field. So what I know from the blockchain field, and that might be not really up to date, I hope the other panelists help me here out on what is actually a problem at the moment. But I remember there has been a lot of uncertainty with regards to GDPR. And I know there is the EDPB that is currently still working on guidance to help on the uncertainty with GDPR when it comes to blockchain solutions. And also there has always been claims regarding the recognition of blockchain solutions in certain fields to enable more blockchain solutions in fields where it might also be unclear if blockchain solutions are as much in legal terms trusted as other solutions. And here, for example, eIDAS is of course now providing a solid basis, I guess, in the future for digital solutions, blockchain solutions, and providing clarity here. So what do we do in the data policy field? We look actually at how to increase data sharing, and for that we want to build trust. We want to build trust in who uses what data on which conditions. So we want to have more clarity on this, and this is why on what the legislative initiatives in the field of data policy focus on. How does it relate to blockchain? I think blockchain is one tool, is one technology that can offer solutions to also tackle problems we have in the when we look at the data economy. So it can be one technical solution to a lot of issues, and I would would now like to focus on 2 to 3 areas of potential when it comes to the data economy through the blockchain lens. So first of all, it's what I was saying about our field of action and data policy field, building trust. When I think about building trust, of course, blockchain solutions can solve this as well by basically technically representing data transactions. And with this tool of blockchain solution as a decentralized model, of course, it can be very useful to also realize this kind of neutrality, what we are looking for example, with the Data Governance Act proposal that has where we recently reached a political agreement, which is also looking at like neutral actors in data transactions. And I think blockchain is one of different technological solutions to realize such neutrality. Another area of potential looking at the data economy is, of course, safeguards. Blockchain solutions can provide safeguards when it comes to, I want to protect a certain data transactions, that certain conditions of use of the data are respected. And that can be done through smart contracts, for example, which also would be blockchain solutions. And we look at that with the upcoming proposal of the Data Act. Inter alia, there are many topics in the Data Act will be coming up. We have had an inception impact assessment at the end of May this year, and you will find this topic of smart contracts in there, because we think that's an interesting solution to provide safeguards for in a data transactions regarding the respect of certain conditions when it comes to the use of such data. And a last field would, of course, be privacy preserving solutions that could also be with blockchain, enhanced with blockchain solutions. And I'm certain the other panelists have much more expertise in this field. So I leave it to you.
Thank you, Anna, for this quick and concise intro over what the European Commission is doing in the field. And I think you do some very important work here, because as you mentioned yourself, it's all interlinked. And to showcase some of the ideas on how you can tackle or support your efforts, I would like to turn to Jacek now, who represents Billon and is a tech expert and privacy expert. So Jacek, I think one of the issues that are relevant in this debate is obviously how do you best store data in this regard? And I think you have a view on this. So maybe if you would like to introduce us to your views, that would be great. So over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me today. I'm Jacek Pikul. I act as the Chief Technology Officer for Privacy and Document Management at Billon Group. I also sit on the board of one of Billon companies. Billon is a Poland-based deep tech company which has developed its own blockchain technology from scratch. It is quite unique in terms of its capability of storing large portions of data on chain, which is very relevant for our today's discussion. We believe storing data in a fully decentralized manner presents a great opportunity for new business ecosystems, which may thrive without any intermediaries. It enables consortia of equals, where each participant has similar rights and similar responsibilities to maintain this kind of distributed repository. Such consortia have already started to emerge. EU is building its blockchain-based public services platform called European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, spread across member states, for example. Another European project, Gaia X, is aiming to create a common data sharing architecture to exchange data among participants on equal terms. On the other hand, we have interesting regulations related to durable medium of information, which set very high bar in terms of requirements, how data should be stored and made available to consumers. This kind of regulations, durable medium of information, relate, for example, to financial institutions and how they should share information with their clients. The requirements of durable medium are in the first place related to availability of information, which must be independent of a service provider like a bank, which must guarantee that the information will be available for the whole period of its validity and its useful lifespan. And this is also in the case where a relation between a consumer and the service provider ends in the meantime. So, as it is clear, it is not straightforward how to build a solution which fulfills these requirements. We believe that blockchain offers, and especially the on-chain data approach with blockchain, offers a perfect solution to this kind of requirements. And we are building a platform together with the Polish Credit Scoring Bureau in Poland to offer this kind of service related to durable medium of information to Polish financial institutions. It seems that decentralized systems of data storage and exchange set the future of business ecosystems. We believe so in Bilon. And as well as it sets the future for cross-border public services. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacek, for this intro. I know that Ingo has a view on some of the points you made as well, but beyond that, on issues related to identity, among others, and collaterals and credentials. So as I can already see, he wants to already tell you all about it. So to enable that, please, Ingo, floor is yours.
Yeah, so I would like to speak a little bit on what we normally do, and we care a lot about digital identity. This also has to do with storage, of course, from time to time. It also has to do something with blockchain. So maybe let's first frame the problem. So the digital identity that we all have is basically held by big American companies, which is clearly not what we want in the future, because this represents a giant threat to us. Actually, it could be cut off, by the way, and it could also be misused, and it is misused, and it's not used in the way that the consumers actually want that. And we also don't have digital identity for machines. And so there's a lot of issues around that. And that's quite interesting, actually, when we look at how we represent or how we represented identity before the digital age. And before the digital age, we actually had two things. Basically, we had an identifier that was basically our name or our face or our fingerprint. So something that was by per se decentralized. My face is not given to me by Mr. Facebook, and also not by the German government. It is just there, right? It's mine. And so this is what we call an identifier. And this is not identity, because it's just an identifier. It just separates me from other people. And the picture of this face then was put on different credentials, which showed my abilities, which showed my rights, which showed different things that I can do and that I may do. And so, for example, a passport that would bear my face, so it links the face identifier to the credential, and then I could say, hey, I'm German, basically, and this represents some rights, for example, to travel to other countries and stuff like that. It could also be, the credential could also be issued, for example, by a university saying, okay, this guy studied computer science and was successful, so that makes it computer science. It's not issued by the government, by another trusted entity. And that could also be the card which I use to access this building every morning, which is issued by a private company, but it is still a trusted entity which issued it. And then a verifier comes and looks at my face and looks at the card and says, obviously the same person. And so we let him in. And that's quite practical, actually, in many, many ways, because it was not clear who is actually the set of trusted entities. Anyone could become a trusted entity. It was dependent on the trust and not dependent on something that somebody said, like Facebook or so. And Also, it was quite practical because when I used my German passport to get into a bar, for example, Germany will never find out that I was in the bar. So the issue of the credential is actually not part of the identity transaction that I do. And this is very valuable because it leaves a lot of privacy, as you said, Anna, in your third point. So we actually had a functioning system which was absolutely brilliant for the last 500 years. And then comes the internet, and we do it in a totally stupid way. Like we give or a couple of big companies the right on our identity. And this is what we have to change. So what we are basically doing is we take the old system and digitize it. Right, so we built a system where you can have a decentralized identifier, like your face again, but now it's only numbers, of course. And you create those numbers yourself. They're not given to you by a central entity. Why should they? This is your numbers. This is what you control 100%. And then you go to different decentralized trusted entities, which could be governments, which could be university, which could be private companies, and they attest things for you and give you digital credentials, and they are all linked to your identifier. And you keep them as a user, like you keep your credentials in the physical world in your wallet, right? And then you choose who to present them, for what reason, when, and so on. So that gives a lot of liberty and sovereignty back to the people. And I think this is a very nice solution in the first place. Now, that wasn't blockchain at all so far. So why would you use a blockchain? You definitely wouldn't, in my opinion, use a blockchain to store the data and the credentials, because this is personal data, and personal data does not belong on blockchain. So here we are completely aligned with GDPR. What we do is actually we store the validity of a credential on the blockchain. So only the validity of a certain credential is stored on the blockchain, so that the issuer can, if necessary, revoke this credential. Just think of something where you have an ongoing training, like, I don't know, in healthcare or so, and you have to take the courses every year. And if you fail to take the courses, then your healthcare credential would obviously be not valid anymore. If you have a digital credential in your wallet, it's always valid. No one can take it away from you. It's just numbers, right? So the issuing entity must have the possibility to revoke your credentials so that you can still show it, but someone can look it up and see, okay, nice credential, but not valid anymore. And this is what we use the blockchain for. You could say, yeah, that could be done by a government, that could be done by a private company, but this would be absolutely dangerous, even more dangerous than Facebook, because this entity could then go and basically tell everyone, hey, we're going to revoke all your credentials unless you pay a lot of money to us. So, this is where you actually need a decentralized system, which is not owned by anyone. And yeah, this is basically our concept. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingo, for this introduction. And I would like to turn now to Geoff, who I know does a lot of research on issues related to privacy, and I'm pretty sure he has some views on what's just been said. I'm very curious to hear that, so please share your views with us, Geoff.
Yes, thank you, Robert. So first of all, I'm Geoff Goodell. Many of you know me. I'm a lecturer in financial computing at the University College London, and my research involves socio-technical systems, particularly in the context of digital currencies and digital marketplaces. Much of my work involves distributed systems and the interface between distributed systems and the digital economy. And distributed ledgers are an important part of this, and I convene a few ISO working groups on distributed ledgers as well. And the property of distributed ledgers that I think we need to concern ourselves with is this immutability, right? In contrast to traditional records management, where the authoritativeness of records follows from indexing the authority of individuals creating records in some sort of juridical context, distributed ledgers are different. The immutability emerges as a characteristic from the decentralized consensus of the participants in the ledger. Now, this is very powerful, and of course, this immutability creates challenges. So the immutability builds trust in the integrity of the records, although it's precisely what creates problems when regulatory demands or other business needs demand that some records should be deleted or changed. So if business needs or regulations say, no, we have to delete this record, well, distributed ledgers throw a spanner in the works, because now we have this immutability that's technically embedded in the decentralized consensus of the system that is actually precisely designed to make it hard to tamper with records in this way. Now, the issue here is you can't assure the deletion of that which you cannot explicitly control. And if the parties in a decentralized system are truly independent, as we would expect that they would be, I mean, this is the point of a distributed ledger, then such control might not be possible. Now, although there are mechanisms such as tombstoning or burying or re-signing blocks that can be used voluntarily by DLT nodes to make data inaccessible, whether it's, you know, the question of whether it's reasonable to expect any kind of assurance that data are ever deleted is an open question. And by the way, this is a question, blockchain or not, right? This is an issue of do data get deleted or not? And the answer might be no. So this brings us to the question of identity, which is the set of attributes that can be used to distinguish an entity in a context. The challenge, oh, and by the way, I see this, you can prune data while maintaining the chain of signatures. Yes, that's part of what I mean by tombstoning. It's in this class of things that we could do. But the point is not whether we as an operator of a distributed ledger can do pruning. The point is about whether data actually get deleted, whether data are actually no longer accessible. You can't tell every particular independent operator of a distributed system to delete something and expect that they'll all listen to you. Now, maybe you're a regulator and you say, well, if you don't delete it, we will cause problems for you. Yes, you can do this sort of thing, but you have to be really careful with these kinds of systems because in general there will always be this kind of moral realism, this loophole, right? I can choose to delete it or not. You can't force me to delete it. You can tell me to delete it. You can penalize me for not deleting it, but you can't really force me to delete it. And this brings us to the challenge. Now, with identity, the challenge here is that there is an intrinsic conflict between data subjects and relying parties. Right? Data subjects want to reveal exactly what they want to reveal and nothing more. And relying parties want to be able to link the data subjects to as much history and background information as possible. I mean, yes, I'm painting with a broad brush, but bear with me. And let's forget about expecting that anyone can delete data, which goes back to what I was saying before. You know, blockchains are not, you can't trust what you can't verify. And it's impossible to verify that data, once it's been collected, have not been used in any particular way. And I'm thinking parallel construction, which, by the way, is a popular technique in law enforcement, but I'm also talking about data breaches and platform operators needing access to data and so on. Now here, a system that requires anyone to use the same identity in multiple contexts presents a problem. Now, Ingo mentioned digital identity for machines, and yes, machines can indeed have digital identities. And personal devices that users own or carry are examples of such machines, and we should be concerned about any kind of personal devices that would be expected to identify themselves. So we should be concerned about the MAC addresses in our laptops, which we can configure to rotate if we want. And we should be especially concerned with IMEI codes in mobile devices like mobile phones, which are difficult or illegal to rotate. And we should also be concerned with digital wallets that are expected to carry identifiers for the same reason. I mean, if I have a wallet, a physical wallet doesn't identify itself to anyone. That's the whole point. If a digital wallet were to have an identifier, this would raise tremendous problems for individual rights. So the solution must involve having people able to have multiple, independent, disposable identities, which they can bind to attributes on a case-by-case basis according to their wishes. And of course, this creates a challenge for regulations and proposed regulations, including EIDAS, which I hope we'll have a chance to discuss today. Thank you.
Thanks for this elaborated excurse, Geoff. I can imagine that Jacek and Ingo have probably some responses. But first, I would like to ask Anna if you have any particular views on anything that has been said so far, anything that is in line with what you're planning or working on already, or anything you maybe would like to learn more about. So please let us know.
No, thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear all your examples. But as I said earlier, I think the proposals I could elaborate on, the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, are not clearly linked to the challenges you were mentioning. So I leave it to Ingo and Jacek to react to what Jeff said.
So guys, who wants first? Maybe.
So first of all, I completely second Geoff. People must be able to have more than one identity. That's absolutely clear, especially if it is digitized. So there's a lot of people who have more than one identity. I could be, I don't know, a Hells Angel at night and a CEO in the morning, and that would be my good right, as a free citizen. There's different aspects to an identity, and they should also have the possibility to have different identifiers to collect them. But I think what's also possible, what's also necessary with identity is that you never show your full identity. And this is where we're heading right now. With all the information that the big American giants are collecting about us, there is a full identity about me. And when I want to go into a bar, for example, and I need to be 18, of course, it would be nice if I show maybe my passport because it has a picture on it. And I should also reveal my date of birth because they need to figure out if I'm 18. But definitely I can put my finger on the card where my name is, right? Because they don't need to know what my name is, right? We call that selective disclosure. So selective disclosure of identity pieces must definitely be possible. So this is absolutely necessary. But I also second that people must have the right to have different even identifiers so that they can build different identities on top of that.
Thank you, Ingo. Jacek?
Yeah, so I agree with both Ingo and Jeff in terms of selectiveness. I'm not sure if this should really be referred to as different identities. I would rather consider this like different views on certain attributes of possibly a single identity, but that's probably more a technical way of implementing it. I think we're all in agreement that it should be left to under the control of a person to decide what he or she wants to disclose about themselves in which context. I would like to refer to what Jeff said about this inherent conflict between deletion of data and blockchain properties or characteristics. Probably if you take it literally, that deletion means like destruction of data, then indeed it is difficult to reconcile with the blockchain. But also other interpretations might be possible, right? Depending on how it is actually worded or how it is interpreted. The point of this erasure or forgetting, as we understand it, is that it should not be possible for a data controller or data processor to access the data. With the cryptography as it is used nowadays, you may imagine other ways of achieving similar result. And for example, at Bilon, we devised and we patented the special obfuscation technique, which involves encryption also, but it goes beyond encryption. It also involves special transformation of data into special particles, of which none includes any part of the original data. Then they are dispersed in such special form, and it is only up to a person possessing proper cryptographic keys to revert this process and reassemble the data. So in my opinion, it is very much to a large degree dependent on how you interpret GDPR. And probably this should be one of the key points of today's conversation, how to make sure that we are able to, on one hand, tackle the opportunity, huge innovative opportunity of blockchain, and at the same time, make sure that the goals or the purpose of GDPR is satisfied.
Thanks, Jacek. Geoff, I can see you raised your hand already, so I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that briefly. So 2 points here. One, I would like to underscore that different identities cannot just be different views, because different views on a single identity or a single set of attributes assumes that there is some master record. And there are many systems that have this kind of characteristic, this kind of feature. It follows from a paper written by Jan Kamenich and Anna Liskinskaya, which was in Eurocrypt 2001. That was 20 years ago. So they published this idea that they called anonymous credentials. And the idea was that users are encouraged to, but I'm going to argue that they're not as anonymous as the title suggests. Now, the users are encouraged to bind all of their credentials to a single master key, right? And they can then reveal credentials, whichever one they want. But they can also prove that two credentials were associated with the same master key. That creates a problem. And the fact that they can make such proofs means that they can be asked for certain information. And here's an example. Suppose that we assume that a passport issuing authority only signs one subkey credential per person, and that I could potentially prove that some arbitrary credential, such as maybe a discount card for my local coffee shop, were bound to the same master key as my passport credential. What would stop relying parties from asking me to prove that there was a passport signature on the same master key as the credential they were looking for? Now, that might seem like nothing because that credential might be a completely blinded credential, but the fact that I can have only one of them creates a problem. It means that I'm sort of tethered into this restrictive sort of net that forces me to only have one real me, if you will. And that creates a problem for people. People really want to be able to establish independent identities, disposable identities, things that aren't bound, because this property of early binding really constrains what people can do, because it allows certain credentials to stick to them. And that's a real problem. And that's a problem for human rights. Now, the second point that I had was the question of, was really this question of whether we could imagine having systems that only restrict access. Well, we can do all sorts of fancy things with computers. And we can make it so that it's hard for me to recover data from some machine that lives somewhere. But the problem is not how hard it is for me to recover something that's been deleted or not. The question really should be about how I can prove what has happened with data. And the problem with data collection is that once data are collected at the source, you can't prove to the data subject that their data have not been used in some particular way, no matter how high quality or how secure your data lockbox might be. And I think that by focusing on the data lockbox, we're focusing on the wrong question. We should be focusing upon how we can prove to individual persons that their data have not been collected, because that's the only way to prove that they have not been misused. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Geoff.
A very good point, but actually really hard to implement properly. So I think what we have with legislations around us is not so bad. Actually, the GDPR was a move in the right direction, because it will always be possible, maybe not in 20 years, because when we are really far down the road, but right now I will send data to people. When I show my credential, It can be copied. It can, when we do it intelligently, like we would do it in Kilt, the other person cannot impersonate me. Okay, that's cool already. But of course, they can collect the data and learn about me. But this is, in my view, where GDPR kicks in, because when this person collects my data and I didn't consent to that, then there should be authorities which get after him, right? I think we should rely on those things, because they are actually good. And I think the whole world is very jealous of what we have there with GDPR. Maybe it doesn't really recognize blockchain how it should, because it is from 2012 or so, and obviously blockchains weren't there. So it needs to be revised in some way or form, especially around hashes and all that stuff. But I'm also happy that we have this in Europe, these things. So we can take care about the technological things which are feasible right now and also user-friendly enough. And then we should rely on the relation outside of that.
You said something really important, Ingo, that I want to get back to, which was that the authorities should go after someone who collected data improperly. So this isn't about posting data improperly. This is about collecting data improperly. I agree with you. Now, if GDPR were interpreted that way in practice, it would be much more powerful than how it seems to be interpreted in practice today. Would it not?
If I may, I really like the argument about the proof or proofing. I think it actually aligns very much with the blockchain and how it can be used. And this is what blockchain is good at. Traceability and auditability are characteristics of blockchain. So actually storing this kind of activities or this kind of actions also by data controllers or data processors on the blockchain could be a good answer to that. And maybe just to make everyone aware, at the moment, proving that a data controller executed any kinds of, let's say, claims from a data subject is mostly procedural. So at the moment, I mean, the way you prove to a person, to a data subject, that you actually executed, for example, their right to erasure is by issuing a piece of paper or sending an email. There's no real hard proof for that. So blockchain could be actually one of the good solutions to that.
Could be. I think there's also others. So we are right now building, as an example, for Guild, we're building a service which is going to be released in a couple of weeks called social KYC, which is basically a different type of KYC where you don't go with your passport papers, but you prove who you are by your Twitter handle and by your email address and all that stuff. And then you build some kind of trust around that. So of course, this is a potential danger of such a service, right? Because it gets your Twitter handle and all that. So now how do you, so we say, of course, we forget about the transaction as soon as the transaction has been done, right? So we ask for your Twitter and then you tweet something and then we forget about you. How can I prove that we really forgot about you? What we're going to do is we're going to, of course, open source the whole thing and put it in a trusted execution environment where it can be sure that the executable which is run there is exactly what you see as the source code. And then you can see that this is actually forgetting about the data. But this is what you can do right now, I think. Of course, you can link the trusted execution environment, then up to a blockchain, which we're going to do, so that all the transactions of running the system is stored on the blockchain, and that can be proven again. But this is a technology which, okay, I think creates enough trust so that people can believe us that we forget about their data. But probably bigger companies which collect data on a professional basis will not be willing, able, and so on to go this way. So I think there will be different types of solutions for it.
I don't share your enthusiasm for trusted execution environments. To be honest, I think we always have to ask the question, trusted for whom? Secure for whom? Whose security does trusted hardware serve? Does it serve an individual user? That's hard to say when everyone is being required to use the same hardware vendor. It would seem to me that economics would expect that to be. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, don't get me wrong. I'm not proposing that everyone has a trusted execution environment at home. I say we run a service which is run on a trusted execution environment so that we can prove that exactly the software which we say is open sourced is running there. And everybody else just uses his normal computer, but you can see that this is a software which is running actually forgets about the data. So
I get it that requiring users to carry around trusted computing devices would be a disaster. I totally agree with that, because you know basically that's a third party adversary in their pocket, right? I totally agree with that. But I also worry about trusted execution environments on the institutional side as well, because who is to say that the institution has not negotiated a back door that has not been audited? Who is to say that that institution does not have some kind of special treatment? It seems like a big leap of faith, especially if it's very hard for the trusted execution measures to be validated by the public. And that's, I think, where we are with trusted execution environments today, and I'm concerned about that very much. I did want to go back to briefly to the point that came up about the use of ledgers to record the fact that GDPR has been established now. I think that's a really great idea, right? I mean, basically, what is the point of distributed ledgers? It's really to provide immutability, right? It's to provide this view that can't be tampered with. So if a powerful party is forced not to equivocate by having to commit something to a ledger, I think that's a really powerful concept, and I imagine that we'll see that pattern. We'll see that pattern emerge in this kind of technology, and I think it's a good one.
Take a step back for a second. So thanks for all the contribution. It was great that we had this fluent discussion. Showcases that this is such an important topic. And I just would like to quickly shift to something that is a current trend at the European level and also in other places. So asking you guys, how does the current push for data localization requirements fit in a decentralized model for data governments? How could that affect that? I don't know if you guys could quickly touch on that from a decentralized perspective. Not all at once, please.
Sorry, maybe could you elaborate first what you mean with the current push for data localization? So
there's a lot of initiatives going on that try to localize data basically where it's stored, and if it's a decentralized system, then it's a decentralized storage as well in most of the cases. So the question now is, if you want to locate data somewhere, although it's decentralized, how should that work in practice? Can that work in practice, or does this create some issues we haven't thought about yet? Because there's those initiatives.
I would just generally say that there's a lot of push from time to time. When you also look at, Geoff also said he wants to discuss EIDAS, also interesting point, because we have old regulations dating like 20 years ago, which always think that everything is centralized. And then it would be, of course, if everything is centralized, it's really interesting to know where the data is, and if it's secured and stuff like that. And if you have a central database, then it would also be really, really nice if you know who the keys who made the keys, and are the keys secure enough, and all that stuff. That's all true for centralized systems. But this is like 20 years old technology, and we're moving into a decentralized world. And there must be a time when legislation and regulation starts keeping up with this. And especially for EIDAS, this time hasn't come yet. It's not in there. And if you want to localize data, that's completely impossible. But what you do there is actually, when you give those regulations out, then actually policymakers force developers to build systems which are centralized, because there's lots of people who want to run something which is distributed ledger, blockchain, stuff like that, and then comes regulation and say, yeah, but we need to know where your server is, and then you say, okay, they need to know where the server is. Okay, then we build a central database and call it a blockchain. And this is what you see very, very often right now. So the idea behind the blockchain is actually that it is producing a trustless system, so that you can trust the pure mathematical truth without trusting any entity, but then you have to acknowledge that there's no entity, and there's also no place, and there's also no one signing a piece of paper for EIDAS. This is completely impossible. We can't do that if we do it right. And the problem is much more, and this is what I see in the last years, and this is really breaking my heart, because we have such beautiful technology out there, and a policy forces people in using it in a totally wrong way, and making central services out of that, or distributed services with a responsible person in the end, which doesn't make no sense at all, because then you have a system which requires trust again, and we wanted to build trustless systems. And so I think there's a lot of work to do for policymakers to recognize what we're actually doing here. Otherwise, it's really, really complicated. So as a blockchain company who does it in the right way in the European Union, we have a lot of problems, I can tell you, because we are always required to do things which we actually can't do, right? And you always have to somehow fiddle around and find ways, making it so much complicated. I think in the last 4 years, we paid more to lawyers than we paid to developers, which is somehow crazy. It's so much easier somewhere else, and this is probably also why a lot of people actually leave Europe to do their stuff. We stayed here, but it's actually pretty hard.
If I may chip in just one thought that might be a little disconnected, but I would maybe like to raise awareness for it. There is since 2018 this regulation on the free flow of non-personal data, which is actually prohibiting data localization in the national laws. So if that is currently being evaluated, it might make sense to see it also in the context of blockchain, because the regulation was initially aiming at incentivizing cloud markets so that we wouldn't want to have any localization in national laws, because we trust within the EU as much a server in one country as in another. But yeah, considering that this is also a problem from a blockchain perspective, it might make sense to raise this issue more prominently.
If I may add to that, for me, blockchain and data localization, these two don't have to be contentious. It is definitely a challenge for permissionless blockchains, yes, but when I say blockchain, I actually see the whole spectrum of various, let's say, variations of how the technology is deployed and how it is made available. So permissioned blockchains, which are probably as widespread as permissionless blockchains, have good answers to this kind of a challenge. So when you, not you, but if there's a clear way of allowing participants into the system, you may actually have some kind of control over who they are and where they come from, and therefore where the data is processed. When we say localization, we probably mean the entire EU. So, I mean, that's probably, you may have dedicated, let's say, world of EU, and you may have other worlds as well. And this way you may limit, let's say, the geographic spread of where the data is processed.
So I just wanted to respond to that question and also respond to a point about distributed ledgers. So yes, it seems that at some level, you know, this quote, this apocryphal quote that was attributed to T.J. Watson from the last century, that the world might have only 5 computers, or that we might have orders for only 5 computers or something. In some sense, it's coming true, right? I mean, there is this re-centralization, and this centralization creates problems because data become linked to each other. That's really the issue. It's about data linkage. Now, I'm not sure whether localization on jurisdictional boundaries helps as much as people hope. You know, I'm not against it, but I would imagine that it's not necessarily as helpful as people think it might be, right? Surveillance capitalism, after all, is a worldwide phenomenon, right? We have these companies that are all international companies. It happens in China as much as in America and Europe and everywhere. So this is nothing new under the sun. So I don't know that this is the panacea that you're looking for. Now, as for distributed ledgers, I think sometimes we expect too much from them, right? I think sometimes we expect them to be general purpose computation machines, or perhaps they build a very rich world state. And the problem with distributed ledgers in general is that they have these majoritarian assumptions, right? Who gets to control the distributed ledger is whoever happens to have majority control over the system. And make no mistake, permissionless ledgers can always be taken over by someone who has sufficient resources to control the system. Whether it's proof of stake, proof of work, it doesn't matter. So I'm really concerned about this sort of overuse of distributed ledgers. Now, what are distributed ledgers good for? Well, this is immutability, but immutability of what? I would say it's immutability of commitments. If you use a distributed ledger to hold people to account for statements that they've made, or perhaps Merkle tree hashes that they've committed, I think we can use distributed ledgers to make sure that they don't equivocate. I think that that's actually a really powerful use of these ledgers. But I do worry about whether we can expect much more from ledgers, especially given the fact that just because it is universal doesn't really mean that it's universally fair or universally agreed. Just ask anyone who's experienced a ledger fork in the past, especially in these cryptocurrency contexts. You know, if you lose out, you can lose big, and that's a real problem.
Does anybody want to comment on the latest statement? Okay, then actually we could then maybe have the audience ask some questions. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. That would be nice.
By the way, sorry, I agree with Niels. I think Niels Vandenberg is exactly right. And although I'd like to point out that this UTXO condition, this unspent transaction token, this token output, I think we can actually do better than that. I think we can actually imagine an environment where we have assets that are actually self-validating. So if we have stateful assets, can we create stateful, unforgeable assets using some kind of technology, some kind of mechanism? And I'd be curious to hear what Ingo has to say about this, because I know that the Kilt system answers a very similar question to this. And I think we can use these kinds of mechanisms to avoid having UTXO as a record that gets maintained, but have the assets themselves carry around their self-validation information.
Ingo, you would like to comment?
Yeah, just to answer that very quickly. I think that what we try is always to give back some responsibility also to the user and not store everything on the blockchain. So my idea is basically to store as little data on the blockchain as possible, because I think, no offense, Jacek, of course there are blockchains which are designed for storing data, but the usual blockchain is exactly designed for not storing data, right? It can store a state of something, but not data. So you don't put basically, don't put too much data on the blockchain. It's really, really expensive, really, really slow. There's better ways basically to store your data, and especially when it's a permissionless system, right? Permissionless systems are slower, they are more expensive, and so on. But they create a totally different type of security, of course, and also of privacy. So I think that the solution is always to, like a little bit with a wallet, right? If so I have a wallet with a lot of credentials, right? And if I lose that, that's really a catastrophe, because I have to go to all the trusted entities again and ask for a new credential, which is why I don't carry all my credentials in the same wallet, of course. So I have the same wallet as I also have some kind of a place at home where I store, for example, my university diploma. Why should I carry it around all the time? So, but giving the privacy back to the users and giving the autonomy back to the users and the sovereignty back to the users also implies to give responsibility back to the users, right? So they have to be responsible for their data again. As long as you think that all the data is stored in a central entity, and this is so practical for you, you will have to live with the fact that this central entity is going to exploit your data and make money with it, right? Especially when the service is free. So if you want your liberty back, then you have to pay with a little bit of more responsibility. And this is what we're trying to achieve with a system, with a blockchain system, which stores as little data as possible and gives the data to the user to store them there.
Agree 100%.
Thanks, Ingo, for the statement. Jacek, do you want to comment on that before we go into the final question?
Just let me put the light on. Okay. Indeed, most blockchains are not good at storing large portions of data. We are different in these regards, but I fully agree with Ingo's statements that it is about giving more responsibility to the user, the person whose data it is, who owns the data. Of course, the question is whether actually people are ready for that, whether they are skilled for that, whether they are sufficiently aware of that. But there's one element which I think would be worth to introduce into our discussion, which is eIDAS and the planned eIDAS revision. So the creation of electronic IDs, because they somehow, I feel, linked to a few themes that appear during the conversation. For example, related to the source of trust, which Jeff called out a few times. How do I know? How do I believe? And so on. So I understand that eIDAS is actually this kind of regulation which tries to provide these sources of trust, and especially the ongoing revision, which is to introduce electronic ID, to my understanding, is a way of establishing, let's say, this digital representation of natural persons' identities.
So that's a real concern, right? I mean, imagine, well, first of all, key escrow. I mean, I think we all remember key escrow from 25 years ago, right? This idea that I'm going to issue private keys to people and give them to people. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? So I'm certainly concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the idea that that we would encourage people to use certain kinds of trusted hardware devices, or vet the hardware devices to be satisfactory, because the question becomes, satisfactory to whom? Is this security for individual users? Well, if it's security for individual users, then that would mean that they would be able to have their own choice. Forcing users to accept someone else's stated security, or pass someone else's stated security thresholds, well, that is exactly not what empowers, and it's very paternalistic. I might suggest otherwise. So I think that we have a concern about this, about whether this kind of paternalism could work, and certainly we'll have a challenge on this. Now, as for as for Ingo's point about the distributed ledger, like I said, I agree completely with the idea that really this is about accountability for system operators, right? This is about accountability for people making statements. If I want to produce if I want to produce something that individual persons can rely upon, then the distributed ledger can prevent me from going back on it and rewriting history, and that's a really powerful concept.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Also,
sorry, go ahead, Ingo.
I want to second this. I think this is going totally in the wrong direction. Right now, we have in the physical world, we have a system where basically anyone could be a source of trust, and then we see, oh, it's not good that Facebook is now the source of trust, and then we say, yeah, let's now have some central institution in Europe be the source of trust. This doesn't work. This is not going to be accepted by the people. This is just doing the same mistake again. And we have to distribute this. It was in our life. We are trained for 500 years that we have distributed sources of trust. If you take this away, you will not do any good, I would say.
I think that's the perfect segue to the last question before we unfortunately need to close our webinar. So we talked about a lot about the objectives and challenges of both the EU data policies, blockchain system. So having the commission with us today, and if everybody or if all of you would have a wish to make regulation more future-proof and better equipped for the technologies to come, what would be that, and how would it look like, and what should we do? So maybe I start with Jacek. You touched on this already a bit, so maybe if you can just elaborate a bit, anything additional if there's.
Yes, indeed, I did. Actually, we have 1 minute left, so I will try to be very brief. I believe GDPR should really be carefully looked into to make sure that it is reconciled with blockchain and its, let's say, innovative potential. And they share many objectives. I mean, blockchain and GDPR share many objectives, in particular, giving the control of the data to the user passively, or let's say enabling this kind of ownership. So let's say taking it from a purpose perspective, you can see similarities. So it's probably the matter of finding the right formula in terms of how the legislation is defined.
Ingo?
Yeah, I think I touched basically on everything. I would just have the wish that people in policy making listen a little bit more, see a little bit more maybe the chances of the whole distributed stuff. And I know that this is really complicated because sometimes it is thinking just completely the opposite way of what industry normally does. Because when industry thinks, they normally think very much platform. We want to centralize the data, and of course, I know that people normally think like that, but looking at distributed and decentralized systems actually has a lot of chances. And I think maybe we haven't been loud enough or in the past to actually talk about that too much. But I think it should always be taken into consideration, especially when we look at things like EIDAS and then revise it, and then what comes out of it is actually not really a step forward. This is not good, and we should we have to keep up the work.
Thanks, Ingo. And Geoff, from a perspective of an academic, what would be a wish list for regulators to look into?
Yeah, just 3 items. Number 1 is we need to force the data regulation to be about illegitimate collection, not illegitimate use. Our focus should be on collection, because ultimately you can't verify how things are not used once they've been collected. Number 2, we should recognize that so-called trusted computing or secure enclaves or secure elements and so on, that kind of thing is all third-party trust. Trusted computing is third-party trust, and we should not use that because we really do want the parties who are using technology to be in control. And that means that we need to use open architectures. This is what half a century of standardization around computing has brought us. Open architectures are good. Trusted computing is not so good. And third, and here's the bad news. And this comes to the point that Niels put on the chat about economics and laissez-faire kind of sort of capitalism in these sorts of things. We have to solve the hard problem. Just throwing something to a market doesn't solve that problem, right? Markets solve specific problems and not every problem. We should be really concerned about suggesting that, well, if we just put everything on this sort of anarchical system, then no one is in control. Well, that's just not true. Nature abhors a vacuum, and nature abhors anarchy. If you create anarchy, all that you're doing is creating opportunity for powerful parties to exploit the weak. So I think we do need to solve problems thoughtfully. The solution isn't paternalism, but it's not anarchy either. It's something in between, and it's complicated. And I think it will require effort to answer this right.
Thanks, Geoff. And as we started with the Commission, I would like to ask the Commission to maybe give you last views, last statements, or any other comments before we close for today. So Anna,
thank you very much. I listened carefully, and I'm taking away many thoughts from you. So I think, as Jacek said, the purposes are well aligned, and then the question remains on how do we address these purposes. And indeed, I think on a few points we can all agree. And it seems to be a common concern that the GDPR interpretation is still unclear.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you to all the panelists, and also thank you to the audience for sticking with us. That was our last webinar for this year. So Blockchain for Europe will also take a Christmas break, like hopefully everybody else that listened into, and also the panelists. So thanks for taking the time so close before that. And if there's any questions, then please reach out to us as a secretariat. We're always happy to help if possible. And that's obviously also true to all the Commission members, parliamentarians, staff members, etc., that are interested in the work we do. And on this note, thanks for being with us, and hopefully see you all next year.